It's the old story about the politician. If you are a politician, you don't want to be on a stamp because you may find the population spits on the front instead of licking the back. Graham Royan is the MD of Doreen Royan and Associates. He's our guest this evening. We're talking stamps as an investment, an alternative investment. Just before we went to the break, you were talking about what people are collecting.
Yes.
We're
constantly trying to identify areas of philately that offer people great interest. I mean, you know, it's not just about investment. People are looking, I mean, for example, in 1853, South Africa produced the Cape of Good Hope Triangle, which is also an extremely famous stamp. Now, that is something of great beauty, as is the penny black. Now, the more modern, what we're finding with the more modern investor collector is people are being attracted to more modern philately in terms of the Queen Elizabeth period, because the investor of today is generally a younger man in our area, being philately, is a younger man. So he's now used to computer screens, big plasma TVs. So in terms of what makes the stamps valuable, he wants huge visual appeal. Mm-hmm. Now, for the old-fashioned collector, he would gain huge visual appeal from a beautiful Cape Triangle, a beautiful penny black. We're finding more now the modern investor is looking for the errors. So Queen Elizabeth II the stamps were produced in millions, the quantity. So what we're focusing on for the investor now are the errors that are produced from that range. So for
like what?
For example, you'll find a stamp that is printed, because by now the printing was fairly sophisticated compared to the penny black that I spoke about earlier. Yeah. By now printing was fairly sophisticated, so the number of errors that were being made is very, very small. So that immediately opens up an area of opportunity for an investor. So, for example, you take a 1963 stamp that's been produced in purple, red and black. And the red might be missing, the colour's missing. So it's a printing error. Now, they've been able, with research and what have you, to identify how many of that error exist. So say there's 10 exist. That will make that stamp a valuable stamp. And what we're finding is that the modern trend is towards that sort of error. Now, to try and explain that, there are still people, what we term the classics, being penny blacks, tuppenny blues, Cape Triangles. That's the early philately we're talking about. There are obviously still a huge number of people collecting that, because within philately there are many different things that one collects. But modern day collectors, where the money is, if you like, today, or the modern investor, is looking more towards the errors and varieties, we call them, that were produced on stamps.
Where do you get your stock? I mean, I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because my grandfather, my father's father, used to collect stamps. Yes. And I remember I was always fascinated by this big box that was in the one cupboard, and it was Grandpa's stamp collection. Yes. And my dad had no interest in it, and I wasn't interested either, neither was my brother. And my dad eventually sold the entire collection, to a stamp collector down in Port Elizabeth. Yes. Do you find those sort of things coming onto the market, like estates and all the rest of it? Yes,
there's actually a very, very big stamp collection going to be sold in London. The sales it's being done over a period of sales of one man who put together a collection, obviously over many, many years, deceased. It's going to be sold in London over the next 18 months. So there's obviously a vast collection. Right. We bought a collection in 2008, quite a nice story. A 90-year-old Italian man living in Guernsey put together a collection of modern errors, the errors I've just been talking about. Right. Quite a bizarre sort of a 90-year-old Italian man putting together a stamp collection of Great Britain modern errors. Through our associates in the United Kingdom, we were offered an opportunity to go and have a look at the collection to see what it was about, because we're one of the world specialists in that particular area of philately. Okay. We had a look. It was a vast, vast collection. But obviously for us to buy that into stock is a fantastic opportunity, because the most difficult thing we're finding at the moment is actually buying stock. Yeah. So yes, we're constantly monitoring auctions all over the world. We're being contacted via our website all the time by people wanting to sell collections that we will look at, and in our specialist area. So we're sourcing from all over the world, as far afield as we bought collections in Australia, America, the United Kingdom, and in South Africa, of course. We're constantly getting approached by people such as yourself, who will say, well, you know, I've got an old collection in the garage that was dad's or granddad's. Can we have a look at it? There may be value there, there may not. And, you know, I think so many people, that's why it's so important, we feel, our role in philately is basically as to hold people's hand. And what I like doing the most is to appeal to people like yourself who are looking for an alternative investment, might become interested in their investment. I mean, that's a magnificent combination if you can find it.
Yeah, true.
We're constantly, by way of seeing our clients, we write newsletters that we give to our clients, we're constantly trying to increase the number of stamp collectors. So whilst you might come to me as an investor, what I like to do is teach you about your stamps constantly, about why they're rare, why they're valuable, why I'm suggesting you buy this stamp and not that stamp, holding your hand until you become hooked on this as a hobby, but it's also an investment for you. And well, that's what I enjoy to do.
There's no better way of having an investment if it's also a hobby.
And gives you great pleasure.
It gives you pleasure
yes,
as well.
I mean,
by the way, if you are wanting to contact Graham and the gang, then there's the email address. We'll run it underneath me right now. And you can jot that down. Excuse me, and get hold of them if you are interested in looking at this as a form of investment. Returns. It's always going to come back to the returns. What are we looking at here, realistically?
It's a very difficult question to answer because, like the stock market, the stamp market is a market of stamps. So stamps are constantly moving independently of one another. You know, it's not an asset class like gold, where you can say, well, gold has done this over a period of time, or diamonds have given me this return. You know, I've recently done a revaluation on a client's portfolio, and he bought that portfolio in 1990, paid 300,000 rand for it. Now, I did an exercise for him to 2000, the returns to 2000, and then the returns to 2010. Now, his returns to 2010 was 67% per annum, which is fantastic.
Wow.
But, you know, he initially in 1990 put in 300,000 rand, which was a lot of money in those days. Now, in my opinion, he's taken advantage not only of the stamps as an investment per se, as a pure investment, but he's taken advantage of the rand hedge, because all stamps that I deal in Great Britain and the British Commonwealth exclusively, all the stamps I deal in are valued in pounds. Okay. So it's a great rand hedge investment. Yeah. It's a phenomenal return, 67% per annum. We have a broad spectrum of clients. So, you know, some of our clients prefer to do a monthly investment, like, for example, like one would with a unit trust. Our clients, we have a minimum entry level of 500 rand a month. And what we do then is we put the client into the King George VI collection, which is a period of 1937 to 1952. And that client will ultimately end up with all the stamps produced during that reign. And it's very topical at the moment, of course, because of the King's Speech movie. My clients are sort of gaining even more pleasure from their stamps.
That's an amazing thing that you've just brought up here, because you can have a movie come out and suddenly there's a swing in interest to a stamp or an era of
very
the
much
stamps.
so. On the return front, another thing that's very attractive at the moment is we're finding a lot of money coming in from India and China, of course, because that's the new world. Right. And recently, last week, in fact, a client of mine, I sold him a stamp for £25,000, which is a lot of money, back in 2008. Now, that same stamp last Thursday sold in Switzerland for £146,000. Now, that's a phenomenal return for that man. But that's because the Indians, obviously hugely interested in their own culture, are now coming into stamps, and there's huge wealth in India, Asia. You know, that's coming into the market now.
And I suppose it's people in what would have been previously disadvantaged, if we can use that, communities who wanting to almost buy back their culture.
Yes, I actually have funny enough, to pick up on that point, I have a client, a young man locally, who came to me as an investor, moved on to become very, very interested in what he was doing, and now actually has two collections. He has one collection which he deems his pure investment collection, but he's also started collecting the stamps of South Africa, which are fascinating. And within South Africa, he's actually started to specialise in the Boer War and the postal history of the Boer War, because, of course, there was a lot of mail sent during the Boer War. Now, that is a fascinating period of philately. and tells the story of the Boer War. You know, the Siege of Mafeking, for example. I mean, fantastic postal history comes from that.
Yeah.
And those, you know, there's a definite crossover between your areas of interest and investment at the same time. And that's what we're constantly trying to identify for our clients.
It brings a whole new sort of fascinating side to investments. And I can see why people would get caught up in it.
Absolutely.
Because it becomes a hobby as well as...
And going back to the beginning, I mean, I think that people are attracted to alternative investments at the moment because, you know, interest rates are at an all-time low globally. I mean, you know, money in the bank, whether it be
nothing.
low, well, and you're not even keeping up with inflation. So your money's actually devaluing if you're leaving it in the bank. I think people are nervous about the more traditional investments at the moment. I mean, you would know probably better than I, but I find people are, you know, our biggest investors for many, many years have been people involved in the financial markets, which I always find very interesting, but there are obviously people wishing to diversify. I think more so over the last 2 or 3 years with the volatility that's in the more traditional markets, well, yes, we have seen a huge attraction to our business, but not only that, I mean, art, as you know, has huge prices for South African art are being fetched all over the world. There's interest in all sorts of other alternative investments at the moment.